They have until a few days from now to go on with the royal recommendation. And if they do not, we will start as rapidly as next week to speak with other oppositions.
I mean, I think there are always opportunities to find ways to work together to support Canadians, and certainly I think there is a possibility that we could find a way to support Canadians and Canadian seniors, but that is very much in the hands of the Bloc Québécois.
So the standoff over old age security quickened the pulse on Parliament Hill this week, as it seems the biggest threat to the Liberal minority's lifespan may be the Bloc Québécois and its demands, rather than the Conservatives and their confidence motions. At stake, billions of dollars, the future of supply management, and maybe a fall federal election. We'll start there with our party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial staffer joining us from St. Francis Xavier University tonight. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP. Good to see you all. Happy Friday. We're going to start, Fred, with the issue you wanted to highlight, which is really the Liberals stuck between the Bloc and a hard place. The $3 billion demand on the table for 6 weeks of parliamentary peace. Where do you think we are this week?
Right. It's funny you say that $3 billion demand as if that's a big thing for the Liberals. They blow this money.
It is this week.
Yeah, which is fascinating to me. This is a government that has doubled Canada's debt in their last 9 years. If you go from Prime Minister MacDonald to Stephen Harper, this country has accumulated a debt. Since Trudeau has come in, they've doubled that. They've added this one prime minister.
Okay, but they did take the country's payroll on their bank account and fund the province's COVID response. There's a big reason why that happened, right? Like nobody else had to deal with that.
There's a lot of reasons why. It's big ticket items that this government continually pushes. So it's fascinating. And on the senior side of it, where it was a seniors motion that the Bloc put forward to increase the OAS for seniors to age 65, this is the one demographic the Liberals have left. If you look at all the polling and the research, seniors have been almost sticking to the Liberals more than any other demographic. And it's the one real I would say the Liberal base right now. So it's fascinating to see the other parties vote in favor of this and the Liberals not.
Greg, it is a weird time when older people are voting Liberal, younger people are voting Conservatives, the Liberals are voting no on spending money to give benefits to people, and the Conservatives are voting yes to increase spending by $3 billion a year. Make this Freaky Friday make sense.
Your rant there sounds a little bit like Bill Murray's rant in Ghostbusters that ends with, and cats and dogs living together. So yeah, it has been very, very strange. Usually in the dying days of a minority government, it's the government that is throwing billions of dollars trying to, save themselves. And instead this time it's not. And I'm glad. I don't like to hear the last couple of years and the amount of debt being added to Canada be mentioned without a very important context of a worldwide pandemic. So thank you for doing that. I think the other part of this is in the litany that the Conservatives have when they get to fix the budget. Does that just gone out the window? Or maybe that's why it used to be balance the budget and now it's fix the budget. But it certainly doesn't sound like the same Conservatives who have been as critical as Fred just was of Liberal spending, then to turn around and say this. I mean, this is the purported government in waiting. So they are saying they're going to make a lot of cuts, but now they have just indicated to the Bloc that they're willing, does this mean a Conservative government would actually spend on this? My concern with it is I'm not sure this helps the right seniors that it should, but you also have the Conservatives saying that they want this, but they have yet to be clear on dental care, which I think would, positively benefit a wider swath of people. And then the other thing I noticed too, David, was, in terms of social media and pundits and columnists, the people who are on like small C Conservatives, Robin Urbach, Andrew Coyne, they were incredibly, very, very critical of the Conservatives on this. It is very much a mixed message and was very odd.
Yeah, I'm not sure Mr. Poilievre will worry too much about what the pundits are saying. But to Greg's point, like Mel, the Conservatives voted for this, But when we all followed up and asked them, does this mean this is now your policy? We never got a clear answer on that. So it seems like a bit of parliamentary gamesmanship going on there, that they just want to make life difficult for the Liberals. But $3 billion for 6 weeks of peace is what the Bloc demands. That's $500 million a week. I mean, what do you think the Liberals can do here?
I like to reframe it in the context of like who it is that you're helping with this money, right? And obviously, this is also something that the NDP had been asking the government to do. And it's funny to talk about it in a way where it's a seniors issue. Of course, it is a seniors issue, but it also is an issue for that kind of sandwich generation who's taking care of their parents, right? They're worried about this kind of stuff, and they're paying attention to that. So you're also directly talking to those folks, you know, like my parents who are paying attention to that. The gamesmanship, I think that's totally right. I think while the Bloc didn't make this a confidence motion, that's what I assumed the Conservative support was for, was you know, we're going to make this a little bit tough for the Liberals this week. But what I found interesting with the Bloc in particular is, I think it was last week, or maybe, you know, I think it was last week, where Premier Legault was saying, you know, you can't work with the Liberals, and Yves-François Blanchet said, I'm not taking any lessons from you, we're going to do what we want, and we're going to do what we can. And then just a few days later, he was like, actually, no, we have a timeline, and the timeline is at the end of October. So that tells me, as they went back home and they kind of said, oh, okay, maybe it isn't a good idea for us to work with this government. Maybe we're realizing also that the government has passed its due date. So I found that funny, the almost negotiating backwards a little bit, and now with the Liberals voting against the opposition day motion for the Bloc, it kind of puts them in a tricky situation. Well, where do they go next?
Fred, often in politics, though, you see people, they treat it like personal injury law, right? They make outrageous demands in public, and then they settle on the courthouse steps so they don't have to go to trial. I don't know if there's going to be a courthouse steps for Mr. Blanchet, because they have made clear in their private meetings, I'm told, with the government, they're not moving off the demand.
Right.
They'll negotiate how to get it through Parliament, but they want this number met or else. Do you think it is, I don't know, an attempt to bring down the government and force an election, or an attempt to just separate themselves from the Liberals? Because, you know, Mr. Poilievre keeps saying the Bloc Liberal government in French. This very clearly decouples them.
Of course. If you look at Quebec politics, the two major parties fighting each other are the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois. The Conservatives and the NDP are not in that fight. The Conservatives have, 10 seats in the Quebec City region, and they could potentially grow there, but it's really a Bloc Liberal fight for the most part. And that's who their opponent is. It's about them getting the most seats to be the biggest bloc, if you will, in Parliament that they can actually achieve. So being aligned with the Liberals does them no favors. So they need to put these benchmarks down. At the end of the day, too, I think they feel the NDP will always just bail the Liberals out when they have to, because that's what has been happening.
Well, that's, Mel, just to come back to you, that certainly is the dynamic this sets up, right? That suddenly if Mr. Blanchet completely says, forget it, we're done, and we're going to vote with the Conservatives, it puts the pressure back on Jagmeet Singh in a way maybe they didn't anticipate when they ended the supply and confidence agreement.
Maybe not so quickly. Maybe not, this quickly in the parliamentary calendar. But it does sound, the way that they're talking, as they may be able to pull a few more wins off without that direct partnership with the Liberals, which we knew, that they were trying to walk away from. So maybe we see something in the fall economic statement, or we see something in the next few weeks where the NDP can continue to say, whenever the next election is, well, we were able to squeeze this extra thing, but if you vote for us next time, we'll be able to do step 2, 3, 4. So it is an interesting dynamic so quickly after the supply and confidence agreement was done.
It's almost like removing the stability created all this instability, and nobody knew where it was going to go. But, Greg, I'm hearing from people in government that they have not made a decision yet on whether to meet the Bloc's demand. There is a discomfort with the policy design because the 65 to 74 cohort has some of the highest net worths of any Canadians out there. You want to campaign on generational fairness. Here's billions more for the boomers. That's a tough sell. And also in the finance department, Chrystia Freeland really wants to keep to the fiscal targets she laid down in the last budget. So where does this leave the Liberals? What do you think they do here in the time they have left? Because Mr. Blanchet seems to want a yes or no by next week.
Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing. I don't have much to say on it, but what I'm told is that conversations continue to go on with the Bloc. So they've not, basically stormed out, slammed doors. I think what you're also seeing, from the Deputy Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, is, what a lot of people describe basically as blue Liberals. So basically that part of the party that, wants to help other people, but also wants to make sure that we have a path to balance, or, like, what is the percentage of debt to GDP? We want those guardrails still to be in place. And, a lot of blue Liberals put water in their wine because of what we talked about, the pandemic and the spending that was needed. So I think a lot of Liberals who are realistic and look at the polls and think, the possibility is very real that they're going to lose. They don't want to lose. And, spending like drunken sailors, where they're not going to be able to defend this if they need to be, if they need to have a comeback under, if it, who knows what happens when the election is? What if it's a minority?
Right.
What if a new leader comes along? Whatever happens, this is something that, a part of the party that has been fairly quiet and understanding for quite a bit of time says, no, enough is enough. In terms of, people want to help seniors, but is the right way to do this is to help, in a blanket where, wealthy seniors who are going to be leaving a lot of wealth back into the population, they're the ones who are benefiting instead of the ones that might want to be targeted.
Yeah, there's some seniors in that cohort with six-figure incomes who would still get the benefit. So like means testing and different things are being floated. But Fred, Greg talks about blue Liberals who are increasingly rare in the wild. It's an interesting time in the political life cycle of this government to be very concerned, about the fiscal targets. But the Conservatives have been railing against spending, a dollar for dollar policy. Every dollar in new spending means a dollar in cuts. They voted for something that's going to cost $16.1 billion over the next 5 years, according to the PBO. How do they explain that when they knock on the doors of seniors across the country and say, you voted for this, buddy? Where is this in your platform?
Right. Did they vote for it? It actually wasn't the bill that was up for vote. It was a motion to make it, to give it royal assent, or not assent, but
royal recommendation, which means pay for it.
No, private members, this is a Bloc private members bill that actually can't, even if it passes Parliament, is ruled out of order because it doesn't have...
They can't force the government to spend.
It's a money bill.
Right.
So this motion was to make it a money bill. It wasn't necessarily actually a vote to say we support this bill. So I don't know if we're going to see this in the Conservative platform or not, because again, it wasn't a vote on the actual motion itself or the bill itself to do this.
So this will sell at the doorstep, right? An explanation of how it wasn't actually this, it was actually that, right? I mean,
it's not going to come up. Look, at the end of the day, this is not going to be an issue. I think that is going to be at the doorstep.
Right.
It's except for maybe the Liberals in the Bloc, that fight in Quebec. That's where it could be, because those are the two parties in that area battling.
Well, we also saw 5 Atlantic Canadian Liberals vote because there's a big seniors vote in the 4 Atlantic provinces. But Mel, I wonder if you look at where the Liberals are in this, and there's a discomfort to meet the full demand of the Bloc, and the Bloc says we're not going to negotiate down. But if the Liberals come out with something that the vast majority of needy seniors in that cohort could benefit from, but the Bloc says no, do they get a chance to flip the script here? Is there a tactical play the Liberals can make by saying, yeah, we'll boost it for seniors, but not the full value because we don't think people with high six-figure incomes deserve it? Is there a play here for them?
Oh, totally. Totally a play for them.
And did the NDP go for that, do you think?
Well, I think probably, right? And the reason that I say probably is because, to your point, I don't think if you would ask the NDP if they thought that people making six figures should be getting an increase, they probably have an explanation or some concerns over how that would be applied, right? So I think the idea of it and the idea of helping people who need it is obviously something that they stand behind. But if there's a way to make sure that those who need it most get it, I think you could totally get the NDP support on that. Now, I don't have any inside knowledge that they would. But you know what I mean? Like, absolutely. And again, like to my point earlier about this really puts Blanchet in a tricky position. I think he saw this as an opportunity to go back to people and say, here are the great things that we've done for you to go back to maybe a riding like La Salle, where it was a really close three-way race, and say, oh, don't worry about the NDP, we can get some wins too. And if they're not able to pull it off and they've kind of put this stick in the sand, well, I think stick in the sand, I think they look maybe a little bit silly if the Liberals are able to do that and get support for it.
Yeah, because Fred, they said that we want to make gains. So if there is a gain put out publicly that falls short of the full demand, how do you think that changes the dynamic if it looks like it helps people?
In terms of the Bloc?
Well, no, in terms of the argument to Canadians who are paying attention, right? Like if, say the top 30% of income earners in that cohort, and I'm just making up numbers here, don't qualify. If the Liberals come back with something that really targets the neediest in that group, can they flip it around, I wonder?
They absolutely could. It'd be very smart politics, but I haven't seen these folks do anything like that in the last number of years, right? Like here we are, what is the third week in a row we're talking about opposition motions as the lead story. Nothing, the government controls 3 to 4 or 5 days of the week.
Well, not anymore. There's privilege motions tie everything up, but yeah, I hear you.
But they should, right?
Yeah.
This should be us talk, like, what is the government doing today? And we never talk about that because they're not actually playing the game and sort of going out there and getting voters. And I know I'll get people saying like, hey, it's not a game. Politics is it's a sport, and they're not playing, they're not on the field right now.
So, Greg, what is the government doing today, to pick up on Fred's question, in like 30, 40 seconds that we got left before I got to take a break? I mean, do you think they're preparing some sort of a tactical response to what the Bloc has put on the table, or is it just going to be a yay or a nay?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have confidence that there's a tactical response being developed right now. I said last week that the Liberals had a really good week, and they didn't deserve so because basically, it was the Conservative Party last week stepping on rake after rake. Fred mentioned that the tension or the conversation right now is between the government and the Bloc. It's always going to be with the government, but who's been pushed out of the picture here? The Conservatives. The Bloc leader, he's not shy, camera shy. He's a bit dramatic, and he enjoys the spotlight. And they're having a really good time with this. And I'm sure it's helping them back in Quebec. I'm not sure it's going to be helping the NDP. But he's certainly moved the spotlight onto himself, and I don't know why. Fred, we talk a lot about if you're explaining you're losing. That was a lot of explaining that Fred did about what this really was. That's not going. People are going to push you off the doorstep by that point. I just think that right now, like the government is just sitting back and waiting to see whether or not what the Bloc is going to do and who they're going to pick as their next dance partner.
Right, and look, we'll see what the government does. And look, I know there's means testing for the GIS and these things, but the increase across the board to the OAS, which is the core and most expensive Bloc demand, that's what we're talking about here, not GIS stuff. So.